Hello everyone, this is George Buscemi from Campagne Québec-Vie or Québec-Life Coalition. This is Culture of Life. Welcome to the show. First headline, Canadian Conservative leader Andrew Shearer, I will oppose measures to reopen abortion debate. This is out of LifeSite News. So Canada's Conservative leader Andrew Shearer stated repeatedly in a press conference on August 29th that if he wins the upcoming October election, he will oppose any measures or attempts to reopen the abortion debate and other divisive social issues, such as homosexual marriage. And so he says Canadians can have confidence that these issues will not be reopened under a future Conservative government. And that's what he told reporters. However, he does know, and the Conservative leadership knows, that social conservatives are part of the reason why Shearer became leader. Therefore, he has to throw a bone to that constituency. And so he turns around and says, MPs can, however, express themselves on matters of conscience, but he would ensure that any of their efforts will be stymied. So basically, his backbenchers will be given a short leash. They can yap a bit in Parliament about this or that issue like abortion, perhaps even same-sex marriage, perhaps euthanasia, and so on and so forth. But if they go too far, they'll just pull him back, rein him in, and all his ministers and the top brass of the party will vote against these measures. So it's not very interesting anymore. Andrew Shearer wasn't anybody's, or very few people's top vote. However, he was the third vote for many people during the leadership race for the Conservative Party. And so now we see why. He's a kind of half and half kind of person. He doesn't go full bore on anything. He plays it safe. He's expecting this fall to get in just through the anti-Trudeau sentiment. And so as pro-lifers, pro-family, and pro-God people, we're very disappointed in Andrew Shearer. He's a Catholic, father of 5 children. We would expect more from him. There's 300 abortions a day in Canada, and these people who are killed every day matter. And how can somebody who says they're a Catholic, that they believe in Jesus Christ, that died and resurrected for him, why would he want to hold on to power at the cost of saying something about these abortions? I don't say, what's the point of power when you can't use it for good? That's my question to Andrew Shearer and all these pseudo-Catholic politicians. We don't even talk about Trudeau, who's a total Judas, traitor, and apostate. But Shearer doesn't come off as that. He seems to be hesitant and reticent to completely reject his faith. But I think practically this is what is happening. He's tying himself to a system, to a position, Prime Minister of Canada, which ties his hands and renders him unable to defend the voiceless and to fix past wrongs. Defining marriage between 2 men is ridiculous and should not stand. And somebody who believes in the truth, such as Andrew Shearer purports to be, somebody who believes in the truth, the way, and the life, well, he should stand up against these illegal or wrong measures, but he doesn't. So why is power more important for him than the truth? And that's what he has to ask himself at this point. So bad news out of the 2019 Canadian election. A principles-based Christian or somebody who cares about abortion, I don't think they have much of a vote. They have the CHP, the Canadian Heritage Party, that is there. And if there's a candidate in your riding, go ahead and vote for them because they are pro-life, pro-family, and pro-God. But if you don't have a CHP candidate, I mean, certain candidates in Maxime Bernier's party are very interesting, and both in Quebec and outside. So we'll be publishing a voter's guide for Quebec soon. Campaign Life Coalition has one for the rest of Canada, and Campagne Québec-Vie will have one for Quebec coming up soon. So check it out. But overall, the parties that are close to power, they completely throw the unborn under the bus, and that is sad to see. Next headline, STEM Express CEO admits selling beating baby hearts, intact baby heads in David Daleiden hearing. So this is a headline out of LifeSite News, and it harkens back to the 2015 pro-life event of the year, where undercover pro-life journalist David Daleiden went and interviewed Planned Parenthood people and also these organ providers, these aborted baby organ providers. He went and interviewed them undercover with a hidden camera and got them to say what was suspected for a long time, which is that abortion clinics turn around and sell baby body parts for profit. So places like Planned Parenthood, allegedly, according to David Daleiden and according to what he published, his undercover coverage, they abort babies at various levels of development, going right up to the third trimester, and then they harvest the organs from these children and they sell them to a middleman who then turns around and sells them to universities, research institutions, companies, and so on and so forth. So we have this, and now it's finally been admitted officially by the CEO of STEM Express, one of these companies that kind of gravitate around Planned Parenthood, like vultures circling the abortion clinics for a little scrap of meat. So these companies, like STEM Express, they are middlemen between the abortion providers, Planned Parenthood being the largest abortion provider in the US, and these other companies which do research on research of various kinds which require fresh baby tissue. So they finally admitted during this court case against David Daleiden that this was going on. So David Daleiden and his partner in these undercover sting operations are facing multiple charges of violating the privacy of these companies. And so they have to fight their way out of these lawsuits, because in any other case of investigative journalism, things would be fine. But this sacrosanct right to kill your baby is so important for evil, for Satan and his minions, that they're going to go all out to destroy David Daleiden. So he's defending himself, but at least he got them to say that they did do this organ harvesting and selling during the trial. Next headline, sociologist, new study explodes narrative that people are born gay. So this is out of Mercatornet. So the findings of a recently published study explode the false narrative that being gay is an innate condition that is controlled or largely compelled by one's genetic makeup. So in other words, this study shows that there is no gay gene, quote unquote, and that people are not, quote unquote, born that way. The study found that a person's developmental environment, diet, family, friends, neighborhood, religion, and a host of other life conditions was twice as influential as genetics on the probability of adopting same-sex behavior or orientation, and that the genetic influence did not come from one or two strong sources, but from dozens of genetic variants that each added a small increased propensity. So it's not one or two genes, it's a bunch of genetic variances that add up into a bit of influence towards the same-sex condition. So basically, what this study shows in an authoritative way is that homosexuals are not born that way. It's more about the environment they were in. And so for those who say that, well, homosexuals should be a protected class like the different races, and to discriminate against homosexuality would be like discriminating against a race, well then this study has debunked that. And I don't even think that this study really changes anything anyways, because what this whole argument between whether homosexuality is innate or not, what it rests upon is the assumption that something genetic has to be good. And that's just not true. Some genetic things are bad. For example, just take Down syndrome. Having Down syndrome is not a good in itself. Jérôme Lejeune, who discovered the genetic basis for Down syndrome, called Down syndrome la maladie de l'intelligence, the disease of the mind or of the brain, the disease of the intelligence. So it's something that happens, yes, genetically, but it's a genetic mutation, a deformity of the genes, which then leads to this Down syndrome. And the cure would have to involve some kind of genetic manipulation very early on, obviously, in the human's life, which begins at conception. And likewise, alcoholism is said to have strong genetic origins. And so you can't say that alcohol becomes good because it's genetically predisposed. Alcoholism is good because it's genetically predisposed. No. You just say that, well, that person has the misfortune of having this genetic baggage. And perhaps we could either give some kind of therapy for these people so that they stop drinking, or you can maybe manipulate their genes at a certain period when the technology allows it so that the person stops being alcoholic. So the same could be applied for homosexuality. It doesn't mean it's good if it's genetic. It just means that it's genetic. And if it's bad, well, then you manipulate the genes to change the outcome, or you offer a therapy that might compensate for the genetic influence. Whatever. The question of whether it's good or bad is independent of its genetic origin. That's my point. So this is really a non-issue, but for some people it seems to be an issue. And for those people, well, their argument has been debunked because, as this study shows, there's no genetic basis, demonstrable genetic basis for homosexuality. Next news item. Tesla's Elon Musk population collapse is the biggest problem facing the world. So this is a comment made at the end of the month of August. Musk was speaking with or debating against millionaire or billionaire Jack Ma at a World Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai on August 29th. And so Musk, during that conversation / debate, was speaking with Ma, and he said, most people think we have too many people on the planet, but actually this is an outdated view. So assuming that AI is fine, we're assuming there's benevolent future with AI, so he's assuming that there's not going to be this kind of Terminator scenario where AI turns on humanity. So assuming that's not going to be a problem, I think the biggest problem the world will face, Musk says, in 20 years is population collapse. The biggest problem in the world in 20 years will be population collapse, Musk affirms. So this flies in the face of almost all the intelligentsia opinion, where people tend to say, well, there's too many people on the planet, that's why we have a climate crisis, we have to find ways to reduce, we have to have no children. And actually the reality is that in Western countries, populations are collapsing, we can't renew our population, which has as an effect the need to come up with these fake crises of migration, which will give countries an excuse to import hundreds of thousands of people from other countries into the workforce of the Western country that's imploding. But the ultimate result of that will be the deletion of the host culture. There won't be a Western culture left after all these other cultures storm in at such a rapid pace that they won't assimilate, they'll just take over. And that's the problem. That's the number one problem facing the West. If we have a civilization worth saving, and that's more and more debatable as we go through the news about the library, drag queen story hours, and the so on and so forth. But if we still have a civilization that's left to save, well, one way of really saving it is doing what Hungary does. And Viktor Orban in Hungary has said that procreation is our solution to population decline. Wow, that's like a genius thing to say, as opposed to mass migration and immigration, because immigration has unwanted effects. One of them being, if you bring in too many people at once from a foreign culture, well, you're not going to be able to assimilate them, and they'll just turn your country into their country of origin. And if their country of origin was a basket case country, well, then that means your country will turn into a basket country as well. So that's going to be the big challenge, according to Elon Musk, in the coming years, is that if we want our culture to continue, all these technological advances, they're built on a foundation of Western civilization. And what is that? Well, it's Christianity. It's rationalism, reason, respect for reason. It's the universities. It's believing in a created order that makes sense. So all these things risk being plowed under by other cultures that don't share those beliefs. And if that happens, well, our culture will be gone. And that's a bad thing. Unless that's what needs to be done to get rid of all the problems that we're starting to accumulate, because right now Western civilization is obviously in decay. And maybe, like ancient Rome, it was just time for it to disappear so that something new will reappear. But it's always tough to see a civilization go, and population collapse is just one of those signs that it is going. Next news item now. Swedish prof urges eating human flesh to save the climate. So, wow, I was just talking about civilizational decline. And here's a professor that talks about cannibalism as a solution to global warming. So, this was in the context of a conference in Sweden called the Gastro Summit, so the Eating Food Summit. And the Epoch Times reported this Söderlund, Professor Magnus Söderlund. He's a professor of marketing, so take that for what it's worth, spoke on the topic, can you imagine eating human flesh? And he argued for breaking down the ancient taboos against desecrating the human corpse. And there's a clip available on Swedish television that shows him saying this. Söderlund dismissed taboos against cannibalism as conservative. He suggested that people's resistance to eating human flesh could be overcome little by little, beginning with persuading people to just taste it. He thinks that since food sources will become scarce in the future, people must be introduced to eating things they have thus far considered disgusting, among them human flesh. So we see here another instance of using climate alarmism and panic to sneak in all these other agenda, to sneak in a hidden agenda. So the mechanism or the strategy seems to be we make people panic. When people panic, they lose their minds, they disconnect from their reason, and they become like frightened sheep, and you can herd them all into wherever you want them to go. So scare them, then herd them into a place they would never go where they, using their reason. So one of the things that they want people to be herded into is a kind of a communistic world, a socialist situation. So that's St. Greta Thunberg and company. They want people to panic. And then once they've panicked, they will give all their money to the one world superstate to make the scary global warming go away. That's one thing they want to do. And the other thing they want people to do is to get rid of conservative taboos. And so this is just this climate, this ecological scaremongering seems to be just a way for the powerful to get the masses compliant by stoking fear to such a level that reason is no longer used and critical thought no longer used. We just scare the living daylights out of people so that they just become sheep. And he spoke, this professor, about how, well, we got to break down this taboo bit by bit. Get them to taste meat at first, just to taste it. And then bit by bit, they'll start becoming cannibals. And right on cue, the BBC actually did a documentary in 2016 on the taste of human meat and how it actually tastes. Now, in this documentary, they didn't actually use real human flesh. What they did was they had a laboratory analyze human flesh, and then by the proteins and the molecular structure and so on and so forth of human flesh, they guessed at what the flavor would be, and they created this kind of essence that would supposedly taste like human meat, and they put that essence, that flavor, in a burger patty. And so they have somebody in this documentary taste the burger patty and so on, and just a way of getting people used to the idea of cannibalism. It's a 30-second clip that we have, and so I'll just play it for you right now.
Even if it was legal, I wouldn't want to sacrifice a whole arm to make a real Greg burger. So I've cooked up a mixture of the meats that came up in the analysis of my cooked thigh.
You want a piece of me.
So now I've just got to eat it. It's good. It's like really beefy, bit lamby. I think that's going to be the closest I'm ever going to get to tasting human. I'll tell you what, it's pretty good.
So what is this pattern that we're seeing now? We're seeing every single taboo, every single moral law that humans have always had, and that we've always needed to live in society, they're all being questioned, and these taboos are being eliminated. For what? You see, eating human flesh, sodomy, or same-sex relations, abortion, all these things have been trivialized. Euthanasia, killing old people or people who are sick, or suicide even. Euthanasia is also a suicide. It's a murder-suicide. The doctor murders and the person asks for it. And what's next as well with all these child drag queen performances? We're getting people used to the idea of children as sex objects. And what are these comprehensive sex education courses being given all over the place for? Well, so that kids may be respected in their sexuality and that their sexual and reproductive rights may be respected, so that people who deny kids their sexual relations will be seen as conservative and against human rights, because what kind of monster would prevent a child from having his deserved sexual pleasure? And if an adult wants to be the provider of sexual pleasure for that child, who are we to judge? So all this is slowly happening, and what's the end game? What's the end game of all this? Well, ultimately, the idea that there are intrinsic evils, the idea that there's a right and a wrong, and sometimes something is wrong no matter the circumstances, like murdering an innocent person. That's wrong no matter what the circumstances. But they want to be able to tell you, no, there are no intrinsic evils. Everything just depends on what? It depends on what a bunch of rich oligarchs say. That's the end game. It's that morality no longer depends on the truth of the situation. It depends on power. And whoever has the most of it, that is what right or wrong will be. That's the end game. So whatever a bunch of oligarchs want right and wrong to be, we saw with the Epstein case that many of these billionaires and these world leaders have, let us say, exotic tastes when it comes to sexuality. And so they may be sick and tired of having people tell them that having sex with children is wrong. And so slowly they are reconditioning people into accepting that through these different ways, by these drag queen story hours and twerking with kids in the library. So we see that morality is undergoing a paradigm shift from morality, the 10 Commandments, and thou shalt not, and you can't do this no matter what, to what you can or cannot do depends on what a bunch of oligarchs say via the media which they control. And that's where we're going. We're going to a one-world prison totalitarian government where morality will no longer be a case of objective facts and even less of revelation, but will just be whatever the oligarchs say it is at any given moment. And unfortunately, whereas in the past, the Catholic Church has been a bastion of sanity in this ocean of insanity as regards morality, well, we've seen with the sins of the priestly sex abuse scandals that that's not the case in terms of practice, but even worse, in terms of doctrine. When you read Amoris Laetitia 303, paragraph 303, which says that conscience can tell you what's right or wrong, even though what you're doing is objectively wrong, sometimes it's okay anyways. And God approves of it, because that's the best you could do at that moment. Well, something like that means that the whole idea of intrinsic evil is out the window, and sometimes what's wrong according to the Decalogue could be right according to your own conscience, and you have to do that. Now that's nonsense, and that's dangerous. And so we see that the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, the men in the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, are being also brainwashed by this moral relativism and are being brought in line with this one world order that wants to eliminate all morality for the sake of the powerful. Next news item, speaking of brainwashing, the Canadian Cancer Society uses transgender woman, that is a man, biological man, on cervical cancer page. So this is a news item out of a newspaper that I haven't heard of. The subheadline is Canada Showing the Way. I forget the website, sorry, the source of this news item, but one can go to the Canadian Cancer Society page, and when you look under various headings, you'll see transgender cancer page, and then you go and they show a transgender woman, so that's a biological male who thinks he's a woman, and they go, how to treat your cervical cancer. But, you know, newsflash, men don't have cervixes. Men don't have a conduit between their vaginas and their uteruses because they don't have any of these organs. However, the Canadian Cancer Society is so woke, they're so politically sensitive that they're willing to pretend that biological males may come up with cervical cancer and ought to be treated, and they may also have breast cancer, and so on and so forth. So they're ready to humor people who are under the sway of a mental disorder. It's a dysphoria, gender dysphoria. So a man who thinks as a woman is gender dysphoric. They have a problem at a certain level of their mental capacity. They're troubled, and it's a sad situation to be in. And now they're willing to humor these people into thinking that they are what they are, that they are what they think they are. So I find that insane. And again, what's the reason for this? Why are they doing this? Why are they pretending that a man can have cervical cancer? And they'll even write this on their webpage as a serious thing. Why would they do that? It's ridiculous, and I can't even believe I'm saying it. Well, the reason is that they want like I said in the previous news story, they want to uncouple morality from objective truth. They want to make morality a function of the opinions of the powerful. That way, morality, what's right and wrong, will be whatever these rich oligarchs say it is. And they don't want to be responsible to any higher authority. They don't want to be told, you shouldn't be having sex with little kids. You shouldn't be killing babies. You shouldn't be euthanizing old people. They don't want to be told that. They hate that kind of reproach. So they want to be the final authority on what's right and wrong. And so they are gaslighting us. They're trying to convince us that morality has nothing to do with objective facts. And that they're even like rendering us unable to verify reality with our own eyes. When I see somebody with a penis, that to me is a man. Now they're telling me that's a woman. They're totally kind of driving us crazy so that we can no longer discern for ourselves what's right and what's wrong. That makes us completely pliable. That makes us sheep. They're introducing cannibalism so they can eat us. That's the future. That's the future where we're going if we allow it. We're allowing these powerful people to redefine right and wrong, to redefine what human life is, to redefine what man and woman is, to redefine marriage, as they did when they made homosexual liaisons marriage. If you allow the powerful to redefine all these things, well, don't be surprised if it starts saying that men can have cervical cancer. And don't be surprised at all the other stuff that comes down later. We've already started the process a long time ago. So to stop it, we have to go back, way back. Next news item and final one. Trump admin launches unprecedented pro-life effort at UN to fight pro-abortion EU. This is from CFAM, which is a UN NGO, and they are pro-life and pro-family, and they are doing very great work. And so they mention here a US government letter that has been sent out to all the foreign capitals to request support for US pro-life efforts at the United Nations. And it's a letter signed by US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar, ahead of what is billed as a global health summit in September. So basically, the letter states that they want to eliminate the ambiguity in the following two phrases: comprehensive sex education and reproductive and sexual health. Now, the way that pro-aborts and I guess sexual degenerates of various stripes want to put forward their agenda at the UN is that they have these very vague phrases in the documents of the UN that people vote on, and they vote on without being too sure what they're voting on a lot of the times. But what they do then afterwards is that these people then claim that those vague sentences mean abortion, or that they mean having drag queens twerk in libraries all over the world. And so these ambiguous phrases, comprehensive sex education or sexual and reproductive health, are kind of like Trojan horses, introduced in documents of the UN, voted on, passed, and then they have all these meanings that the global left then attribute to them. And what Pompeo is saying in his letter is that we have to get rid of this ambiguity. We have to empty the Trojan horses of all their little soldiers. We have to make sure that it's clear what these terms mean. And so he wanted to dissociate sexual and reproductive health from abortion. Abortion is one thing, and sexual and reproductive health is the health of the reproductive system and of the person's sexuality so that they're healthy and they can reproduce. That's the normal way you would read such a phrase, but that's not the way the global left reads it. Or comprehensive sex education. Well, it could mean that, eventually a child will learn all about marriage and how to prepare for marriage. No. What it actually means is that you have to learn how to masturbate, and you have to learn that that the anus is a reproductive organ, as they say in Quebec's comprehensive sex education classes. So basically, Pompeo just says, end the ambiguity. Let's be clear about what we mean by our terms. But then Europe, a lot of the European countries and the Western countries, Canada, they refuse to let go of this ambiguity. They want their agenda to be driven through via these Trojan horse terms. And so it's at least good to see that the American point of view is clear and that this has a big effect at the UN when the US is pro-life. When it was Obama, it was a big disaster. But now that it's Trump, it's a lot better for pro-lifers at the UN. And we have to thank Trump for that. He's not perfect by any means, but at least for the pro-life issue, he's pretty solid. And on that, that's the end of the news show for today. I thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. God bless.